Hi, it's Jeff from Noodles.com and author of the Essential Chinese Hotpot Cookbook. This is a follow-up video to the lo mein noodle dough video that I've done that really just showed you mixing of the dough, but then we didn't do anything with the dough. So here we are with that dough ball. This is literally just a couple minutes later, and I'm going to make noodles out of it. So let's push play on it on my end, and I'll talk through it with you. So anyway, you can see here I cut it in half and then covered the other half with a bowl just to keep it moist so it doesn't dry out. And then from here on out, it's really I'm just gonna roll this with a rolling pin as you would expect, just to get it as thin as I can get it. You can do this with a pasta rolling machine, although I find that for Chinese noodles I prefer to roll it with a rolling pin. I think the Italian pasta rolling machines actually make the dough really dense, and it changes the bite of the noodles. So I think Italian noodles to me are a little bit more quote-unquote al dente. They've got a little bit more bite to them, whereas the Chinese noodle to me is a little bit softer and chewier as I chew it. And I just prefer the way that tastes, but that's kind of up to you. So if you have a pasta rolling machine, you want to use it, feel free. But you might want to also try and do it with a rolling pin and just see how it goes. I'm going to hit fast forward in a moment here just so that this thing plays faster. But front to end here, I got this rolled out in about 4 minutes or so, so it really isn't that long a process. It's not really that much work. You'll see even in fast forward mode here that every once in a while I might throw a little bit more flour on it. But in general, it's a pretty straightforward process, and I just keep rolling it out until it gets pretty thin. When I did cut it, I would say that the dough was probably a 16-inch thick. It was very thin. And all just with that simple little rolling pin there. So not a very difficult process to do. And when it does get time to cutting, then I'm just going to use a simple knife. Okay, so you can see here I'm arranging the dough onto a cutting board, and here it is with a big giant knife. And you can see I'm just going to slice through this. I folded it over once, threw a little bit of flour in between just to keep from sticking. And again, the folding is really just so that if I didn't fold it, I'd have to cut a much longer cut, and I don't know that my cutting board is really that big. Some people will even fold it over more times, a couple times over, or even literally roll it up in kind of like a jelly roll. Just know that the more you roll it up or the more you fold it over, the more opportunity you have for the edges of the dough to kind of stick to another edge. And that's the other thing to think about when you're cutting. Make sure that you're really slicing more than you're chopping. If you squish down with a knife, even if it's a sharp knife, you tend to take the two edges of the dough that are sitting on top of each other, and that edge will seal up with the other edge, and it gets tough to kind of turn it back into one long noodle. So you can see here I'm able to slide the knife through right at the fold, and they're not sticking together on the edges. So that's the one thing you want to be careful of. So you will see some directions that people tell you to fold it over 3 or 4 or 5 times, or even roll it into a jelly roll. I've done that, and I find that oftentimes when I do that, I end up squishing too much as I'm cutting, and I end up with these kind of pinwheels of pasta dough, but it doesn't come apart easily. Right. The other thing you can see here is I took that one little portion there of pasta or noodles and threw a little flour on them and just kind of turn them into a little nest there. You could take those if you're not going to be cooking them soon, if you're not having hot pot, within the next hour or two, and put them onto a sheet pan on some parchment paper and put them into the freezer and freeze them. That's a good way to kind of store them. If you put them into the fridge, they're going to start to stick to each other, and you're just going to end up with this gloppy mess of sticky noodle dough. So I would recommend freezing them if you're doing this well in advance. Otherwise, just keep slicing through this, and I tend to slice enough until I feel like it's about a portion's worth, because that way when you're eating hot pot, someone can grab that portion as opposed to having one giant mass of noodles and they're trying to separate it out and get a portion. It's easier just to take this one portion and drop it into the broth. And so cut about that much, so to speak. And so in this case, this half of the dough ball made about 3 portions or so, you can see. And I'm going to also add a little bit of flour to this just to help keep them from sticking to themselves. And then I'll slice up that last piece and then transfer them to a plate. For more information about the cookbook or any other videos or information on where to find ingredients, remember Noodles.com/hotpot.